Hello, and welcome to another great video for ICMI 2021. And I am joined today with Dean Hedges. This is going to be a departure from our normal interviews, as we generally talk to the person about a wide variety of things. And today we're going to discuss three very personal stories that will hopefully be a lesson for men and women out there about the reality of our world today. How are you doing today, Dean?
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, and thank you again.
All right. So as I mentioned, we're going to discuss three very important stories that happened to Dean in his life. These are the kind of stories that, if you're lucky, that none of this kind of stuff happens to you, but generally, if it does, only one of these kind of things happen. Unfortunately, to Dean, he experienced all three. So we're going to start with the first one, which I titled Taking the Dog to the Vet. Can you give us a brief overview of that story?
Sure. I had been living with a woman and her child for about a year. I guess it was about a year after that relationship broke apart that some friends of mine had told me that she was off island getting married. And so I was a little concerned about who was caring for the dog. So when I asked all of her friends, nobody seemed to know who was taking care of the dog. So I went out to her house to check on the dog. There was a fella taking care of the house and the dog, but the dog was not being well cared for at all. So I had asked him if I can take the dog, and he said, sure, that's fine. So I took it to the vet and was diagnosed with heartworm and some other grave illness. So when she came back from her trip, she called me up and was fantastically hostile. Wouldn't allow me to speak, and immediately threatened me with saying that she would go to the police and accuse me of being improper with her daughter, of raping her daughter, unless I brought the dog back.
Okay, so let's break this story down a little bit. Now, you said that you had dated her before, but then this took place a year after that. So you had already moved out by this point, correct?
Right.
Okay, and you said that she was off island. So you were living on an island?
Yeah, this was on St. Croix in the Virgin Islands.
So she had gone off to get married, as you stated.
Right.
And you were ascertaining about the dog, and no one had any idea what her plans were. Now, did you have permission to go over to the house to check on the dog?
No, I didn't have permission specifically to go to the house. Once I was there, I had permission from the person who was caretaking the house.
So you go over to the house, you knock on the door, the guy answers, you say, hey, I'm an old friend. I just want to check on the dog. Is that okay? He invites you in, see the condition of the dog and say, hey, this dog needs to go to the vet. And the guy who was watching over the dog and the place said, yeah, go ahead. Is that a good summation of what happened?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. So you take the dog to the vet, which was the responsible thing to do at that point. And she returns home a few days later.
Correct.
And because you have recordings of all of this, I'm assuming that this happened all over the phone, correct?
Correct. This is all phone conversation, yeah.
She calls up. Now, do you answer the phone the first time?
No, the first time I wasn't there, so she left a message on the answering machine.
All right, so she left a message on the answering machine, and as you say, she was hostile, very hostile on that phone. Is that what prompted you to record the other conversations?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you have the recordings yourself, but I gotta say, that is such a leap. She's talking about, hey, return my dog by 5 p.m. or I'm going to go to the police and say that you raped my child. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine. I mean, I'm sure you could play it for me. I'm like, oh, okay, but still, that is such a quick leap there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you give us some more context to that?
Yeah. I would find out later on that her trip to Puerto Rico to get married was sort of disastrous. She ended up getting into a physical altercation with the new husband and then with police. And the child was taken into protective custody for a short time. So her experience off island was miserable. And then to come back and have her dog gone, and the guy who was caretaking wasn't taking care of the dog. My guess is he also probably wasn't taking care of the house. Perhaps from her point of view, this was, just worse on top of worse.
It wasn't even a point that you had any chance to reason with her. She was already hostile. She was already angry, and she wasn't even thinking straight. She just went right for the jugular to get what she wanted. She already had a disaster. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. When I did get to talk to her on the phone, in the second call, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. She was just blistering, calling me names, and threatening to go to the police if I didn't bring the dog back.
And why couldn't you bring the dog back again?
Because I had taken the dog to the vet, and it had been diagnosed with heartworm and a couple other ailments that required intensive regimen of care.
So when you got the second call, did you go to the police then, or did the third phone call come in?
I think I had gone to the police after the second call.
And what was their response to you?
Well, the police listened to the recording. I had to bring the whole phone machine to the station. They listened to the recording and immediately called her up to make sure that the child was okay, and was able to ascertain that no improper behavior had taken place.
Okay, so you were basically in the clear at that point, but you received one more phone call after that. What was the nature of that call?
Yeah, I got a call from her new husband, who didn't directly say I had molested her child, but was saying things like, "Well, there's been some reports of children being molested," but again, it was all focused around bringing the dog back. It wasn't about the care of any children or the child or the neighborhood or whatever. It was intended for leverage to get the dog back, which they did do. The vet released the dog to them eventually.
So there's more that we can say on this story, but we are short on time. So we will come back to this near the end of our video today. So let's go ahead and go to our next story, which I will call Demanding Vagabond. So can you give us a brief overview of that?
Sure. In 2000, I moved to Seattle. Having lived on a small tropical island, I was accustomed to seeing people that I knew. And so I was friendly to people. And some of these people that I was friendly to were street people. And one of them, I had let them use my phone, to call their folks back home. And a few days later, I had gotten a call from the girl's mother, from the woman's mother, concerned about her daughter. And we had agreed that she wanted to send me a care package that had money for a bus fare and some clothes for her to go, to get back home. I got that package, and this person, her name was Justine, I made perhaps from, drug paranoia, whatever, had convinced herself that I wasn't going to give her her stuff, and threatened to call the police and say I had raped her.
So you're just a friendly person. You meet someone, you say hello to them, you build a rapport with them.
Right. Yeah, this is somebody I would see on the street as I walked home from work every day.
So you got to know them a little bit. Now, how did her mother know that you knew her?
Because I had let her use my phone to call, her family back east.
And what kind of relationship did she have with her mother?
I don't know. I'm sure it was strained.
Okay. So her mother calls you up and says, "Hey, I need to get a care package to my daughter. I have no other way to reach her. Is it okay if I send it to you?"
That's exactly what happened, yes.
Okay. Now, how did Justine know that you received a care package?
I told her.
Okay, so you told her one day, "Hey, your mother is sending me a care package, or I've already received the care package?
I told her that her mother had called me and was going to send a care package, and it would be here in a few days, a couple days.
Okay.
She wasn't excited about having her mother talk to me on the phone and make this arrangement.
So she was a little peeved at that point. Now, between that conversation and when you actually received the care package, did you see her any of those times?
No,
Okay, so you gave her the message. You hadn't seen her since then.
right.
Package had arrived, and she was coming over to your place demanding to get in. But
Right.
you weren't
Only
there.
I was still at work.
And how did she get in contact with you?
She called me and left a message on my phone. She wanted her care package, and why was I not giving it to her? Why was I not there? If I'm planning on keeping it, she's going to go to the police and tell them that I raped her.
So if she was a sane person, she would know that, hey, it's the middle of the day. This guy's at work. You mentioned paranoia and use of drugs. So she was probably high.
I would say so, sure.
Okay. So she didn't have a proper perception of reality at that point.
No, this is somebody who was living on the streets as a drug addict.
Okay. So what happens after that?
I come home from work, and about 10 minutes later, she knocks on the door. I give her the box, and that's it. With any luck, she took the money, got a bus ticket, and went home.
So did you have any interaction with the police at all?
None.
And did you ever see her again?
No.
So 2 for 2, we have women threatening to accuse you of rape in order to get something they want. And in both cases, both women were unreasonable, and had they just taken a big, deep breath and not do drugs, there could have been a peaceful way to resolve this situation. So let's go ahead and jump into our third story. And this is getting accused of stalking. Go ahead and give us a brief overview of this.
Okay, so Liz and I started a relationship in the middle of 2000, and she moved in with me. The breakup wasn't particularly easy. There were several, court appearances. Sometimes she would be friendly, other times she wouldn't be. And years later, I had called her, and she reported that to the police. I actually hadn't had a conversation with her. I just called her. And, the police decided to charge me with stalking for that. Most of that was based on false information, misleading information that she had given the police. That case took a year to process, including several hearings, and charges were dropped the day before trial after I had been offered plea deals from the prosecutor, which I turned away.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this story. So let's go ahead and start with the beginning. Now, you had dated this woman at one point in time, correct?
Yeah. We lived together for 4 years.
Oh, so you lived together for 4 years.
Right.
How was that relationship?
It was, there was some stress. There was some strain to it. She did things which were not nice. I would consider it profound betrayal.
So was that for the entire relationship or near the end?
Mostly near the end.
Okay, so how did she betray you?
She ended up, well, she ended up moving in with the guy I was working for. That was a pretty tough chapter to surf through.
Okay, so she moved in with another guy. Do you know if she was unfaithful to your relationship before moving in with this guy?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. They had been having an affair before I was hired.
So she was hooking up with this guy during your relationship, and he still hired you to work for him?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thinking was that I was the smoke screen so that his girlfriend didn't know about it. So that he could say, well, what do you mean? I've hired his boyfriend. I hired her boyfriend.
So this guy hooks up with some chick and then hires you so he can convince his girlfriend, oh no, there's nothing going on. His boyfriend works for me. Why would I want his boyfriend here if I was sleeping with his girlfriend?
Exactly
Yeah.
so.
And that was my first thought. It's like, well, actually, that's kind of genius. At what point did you find out that she had done this?
Let's see, we started working for Dave in September. So this would be November, a couple of months.
When you found out, or when she was in?
A couple of months into the job, I figured it out.
Okay, now you said we were hired. She was working there too?
Correct. Yeah, we were both hired. She was hired, and then 5 minutes later, I was hired.
What kind of job was this?
This was working on fancy yachts, painting and restoring fancy boats.
Okay, so like you said, 5 minutes after hiring her, 5 minutes after he hired her, he hired you.
Right. Yeah, because the three of us were talking together, and he offers her a job, and I'm standing right there. So it looked a little odd. So then he turned to me and was like, well, I mean, both of you.
Okay, so you work for this guy, finds out that they're cheating.
Right.
And how does this happen that you find out they're cheating and she moves in with it?
He had started diminishing my hours and not hers. And also he gave her a $500 bonus. And finally, I started putting the pieces together and confronted her about it.
So how did that lead to her moving in with him?
That's what she did. I mean, I went down to St. John for a hearing. And when I came back, she had moved out and was living with him.
Oh, so she didn't even confront you that she was leaving. She just up and left when you were indisposed.
She picked me up at the airport and dropped me off at my place and then continued on to his house. So it became quite clear. I lost my job and the girl on the same day.
Well, you lost your job.
Yeah. If you can imagine, having your employer take your girlfriend, it made the workplace pretty unreasonable.
Well, yeah, it would be hard to go back there, but it's not that you quit your job, which would have been reasonable. It's that you lost.
I wasn't given shifts. He diminished my hours.
Relationship's over,
right.
But you stayed in contact with her.
Yeah, I tried to keep in casual, friendly contact with her. Yeah.
I'm going to be a little mean here. I mean, this woman cheated on you. You left
That's
you.
right.
She caused you to lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted to be friends with her?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Why?
Well, obviously in hindsight, it might have been a mistake. But at the time, it just seemed like something that you just have to put up with. Like,
so is it fair to say that you had you lived together for 4 years?
Yeah.
And you didn't really stop liking her or stop loving her, even though she did. It's not someone you could easily remove from your life, so you wanted them to stay in your life in some form or fashion. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, once you love someone, that you don't stop. I mean, it's still there, regardless of their behavior.
Well, until they go to the police. I think that's when the friendship stops, right?
Yeah. Well, certainly the trust.
So you were contacting her. This was phone calls or through email?
It was through mostly emails and text with an occasional phone call. And this was through, several years where we would sometimes have friendly conversation and sometimes not. There was really, for me, there was no way of knowing each time I tried to contact her whether it was going to be met with a friendliness or with hostility.
Okay, so sometimes the conversations were good and sometimes they were bad. I mean, it sounds like she's manic, that she has her good days and then her bad days, and it just kind of goes like that.
Well, for me, it was unpredictable.
Well, right.
And
It was unpredictable. You didn't know what you were going to get when you called her, but some days were good, some days were bad.
right.
But the bad days were not enough to ward you off that, hey, if this person's going to treat me like shit, maybe I should stop talking to them.
Well, sure, now one could say that, but
Yeah.
when you're going through it, you're just trying to salvage what you can.
Now so there's her good days and her bad days. Now, was this kind of like throughout your relationship, or did this emerge after her relationship?
I'd have to say it, slowly got worse. During the relationship, she did some things which were pretty horrendous. And, if I had known now what I knew then, or the other way, I wouldn't have tolerated such unacceptable behavior. She did things.
Behavior?
Well, she often went outside the relationship for intimacy, even though, she knew that that wasn't really part of the deal. At one point, I had already been asleep. I had gone to sleep, and she came in late with a friend of hers. This was the barista from the coffee place that we would go to in the morning. And they're both drunk, and they wanted to have a threesome. And I was already asleep. I was tired. My knee was aching from work. This is not something I wanted to do. And I was pestered and coerced into being with these two, and which is very uncomfortable, very humiliating, and I don't know what else to call it.
Well, it sounds like you were raped to me. I mean, by feminist standards, that's rape, but by anyone's standards, they coerced you into doing something that you didn't want to do. I mean, that's like they didn't have your consent,
No,
or
and
rather, they forced your consent.
they knew I wasn't consenting. I had made it quite clear that this was not something I felt like doing or being a part of.
I mean, that's truly horrific that happened to you. And I'll tell everyone right now that when we first started talking about this, you hadn't ever considered it to be rape, and then I told you that it was, and you were kind of surprised. But and I'm not trying to like insert an ideology here, but by the bare basics, that is sexual assault. That's rape right there. And yet, because you're a man, you don't consider that because we're taught that men don't get raped.
Sure.
She had indiscretions through the relationship that, as you stated, this hostility that she had towards you, this manic episode she had, really began after the relationship. Sometimes you'd contact her, she'd be very amicable. Other times she would be extremely hostile.
Yeah. In fact, it was the positive conversations that we had, which really blew the stalking charge out of the water.
So you've been reaching out to her for years, and when she's hostile, you didn't contact for a while, and then you contact her again, and
right.
It's just been on and off for several years, and then one day she's hostile towards you, and that's enough to go to the police to say that you're stalking her.
That's right. Yeah, there wasn't even a conversation. I had called her, I said hello, and that was it. She hung up. And then the next morning I got a call from the sheriff.
And what did the sheriff tell you?
The sheriff asked me if I had called her, and I said yes. And he said, well, we're going to charge you with stalking. And actually, the sheriff was quite hostile too. He wasn't available to my side of the argument at all.
He didn't care to collect the facts. He had everything he needed. You admitted you called her. She says there's been ongoing harassment. That's all he needed. Okay.
That's right.
So the system immediately was not on your side.
No, even though I had all the texts and emails to show reasonable and pleasant conversation through the years, the prosecutor tried to get me to plea deal to anything she could, already, even knowing that there was no case against me.
This went to trial then?
Prosecutor withdrew the charges the day before the trial, which was almost a year from the time I was first charged. So I had a pile of hearings I had to go to, which was horrendous, scary stuff. I had to make several trips to the mainland, for contacting with my lawyer. I got a public defender, a great fella, did a great job. Really, he believed me and believed in me. And plus, I had all the communications where I could show. On one day, she was pleasant and sharing details of her life with me, and other days she was saying, "Don't contact me ever again." And then months later, she was saying nice things again. It was a flip of the coin, really.
So they dropped the charges. Why did they do that?
Well, I assume the prosecutor dropped the charges because they realized they had no case against me.
Well, why not? It was the word of a woman. It was enough for the sheriff. It was enough for the process to get started. What changed?
What changed probably was the interview that Liz had with the prosecutor and my lawyer and a detective and the DV advocate, where Liz had said things that were clearly unstable, and it was an unwinnable case.
So she basically defeated herself then.
Yeah. I mean, I think what the prosecutor really tried to do was to get me to take a plea deal and plead guilty to anything just to plead guilty to anything. I mean, the last plea deal she offered me was for disorderly conduct, thinking I would just, pay the $100 fine and go home.
Well, I guess that's good then that there was no trial, right? To a degree, I suppose that's a relief. However, by dropping the case, it prevented me from an acquittal. I wasn't able to prove my innocence. Well, right, but by dropping the charges, I mean, you're de facto innocent, right?
I don't know if that's so or not. I think in terms of the public record, it's just going to say case dismissed or charges dropped. It's not going to say that there was an acquittal. I think an acquittal is a much more solid statement than, well, we just decided to stop charging him.
And there's a very big distinction here that a lot of people may not necessarily understand unless they go through the court system. But in many places in the United States, and if you get an acquittal, there is a process in some instances where you can get it expunged from your record. However, if the charges are dropped, it always remains there. How often do we see that a guy's accused of rape, but then it's found he couldn't have done it, so the charges are dropped? Society still treats him as if he did it. So even though the charges were dropped, segments of society could still say, you're a stalker. The court couldn't make the case stick, so they failed. You're still a stalker. They don't care what conditions happen. And that's why you wanted to go to trial, because if you could prove your case, which there's a very good chance that you did have the evidence to show that you weren't stalking her, and she sometimes welcomed you talking to her, then the judge would say, well, no, this is the judge, jury, whatever kind of trial it would be, would say that you're not guilty. And then there might have been a process that could get this taken off, whether it was a year, 2 years, 10 years, at some point you could get this taken off your record. But since that didn't happen, this will be on your record that you were charged with a crime.
I think that's true, especially with DV crimes or charges. Getting a acquittal expunged is particularly difficult, if not impossible. And also in Washington State, there's a statute which is called the Discharge of Defendant, which would allow a defendant to be compensated for the expenses of proving his innocence if a case can be shown to have been maliciously filed or frivolous, which I believed I had.
Were you able to pursue this, or did that require an actual trial?
I pursued it in small claims court, was unsuccessful because the judge, who actually would have been the same judge in the criminal stalking case, refused to accept any of my evidence, including the official recording of that of the meeting with the prosecutor and my lawyer.
Why did they refuse it? Do you know?
I don't know, but it would have certainly shown the case against me to have been malicious and or frivolous.
Now, when you're in small claims court, you were representing yourself, correct?
That's right. I chose small claims court because all I had actually thought I was due and what I was seeking was just the costs of the ferry fares back and forth to all these hearings, which was a lot because it was a dozen hearings. Okay,
so let's go ahead and talk about all three of these stories. Now, these are powerful, powerful stories, but basically, I think the common thread through all of them is women having the capability to use the justice system to whatever ends they wanted. And the first case was to get their dog back. And the second case was to get money from you, money that you intended to give. And in the third case, it was, hey, I'm sick of dealing with this guy. I'm going to say that he's stalking me. What do you feel that these stories really represent to you as a whole?
What I see is the justice system or administration being weaponized against men, certainly against me in those cases. I don't think that my situations are particularly unique. I'm sure there's plenty of guys that have gone through similar and worse experiences. The laws are being used as a tool against women and not in favor of, using against men and not in favor of actual justice.
Now, I will share that, I've had similar things here. It never really involved the legal system, but I had one woman basically accuse me of rape and another who accused me of stalking her. In the instance of the stalking, it was to our guild leader for a massive multiplayer online game. Mm-hmm. And it resulted in me being kicked out. I was allowed to bow out gracefully. And what was interesting about that is when I left a note saying, hey, I'm leaving. I didn't say why. I was just saying, you know what? Need to go ahead and get going. Had some conflict, and it's best if I leave. My guild leader allowed me to save face. But a lot of people started commenting, asking me not to leave. She pops into the chat and she says, it's because of me and now I want to leave. And just like that, all those people saying, we don't want you to leave, now wanted me to leave because she threatened to leave. And they're like, well, no, he's the asshole. He's already going to leave. You don't need to leave at all.
Yeah.
And I relate that story to what you went through because in the last case, you got the sheriff department calling you up and pretty much already determined you were guilty, just like that, because of the word of a woman. And like you said, weaponizing the legal system. And this is what the court system is today, whether it's criminal court, family court, what have you, small claims court. It's a woman says something, everyone believes her. And the only reason you didn't go to court is because she was insane.
There's an aspect to the Violence Against Women's Act called the full faith clause, which allows a judge to accept as true anything that the woman says without having to provide any sort of supporting documentation or evidence.
And that makes sense because I've heard a lot of stories over the years about things happening in court that really came down to it was something a woman said, so it must be true.
Yeah. I had a judge tell me after I had given her a copy of an email sent by Liz, sent by my ex-girlfriend, where you can see exactly what she says on the email. And the judge looked at me and said, "Mr. Hedges, I don't believe you." And the only reason why she could do that was because of this clause in the Violence Against Women's Act, where the judge can simply decide that the ex-girlfriend, whatever she says, is true. She didn't even turn and ask Liz, "Did you send this email?" She just automatically said, "Mr. Hedges, I don't believe you." I was astounded. I was quite green. I had all these experiences really, allowed me to see what's going on, and in hopes of sharing these, can prevent some miserable experiences for the next guy.
Let's say that you could meet your past selves in each of these instances. And obviously you're going to try to prevent them from happening, but what would you really tell yourself about the nature of the world itself?
I would say that the support and compassion that I'm expecting from the world is not going to be there.
And third case, the stalking case, is that what led you to the men's movement?
I think it certainly solidified it and inspired me to pay a lot more of attention to the issues that all men are facing. I think it was a long, slow awakening, really.
Okay, but looking back at yourself now, I mean, some of the questions I asked you were pretty tough. How do you look at yourself at that time? How do you see who that person was?
Oh, I would say that I was someone who believed wholeheartedly in something that actually wasn't so. So my dedication to the relationships, is romantic and honorable. However, there just wasn't enough attachment to reality with them.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing. I mean, I look at my past self before I got into the men's movement, and I just had this belief that if I truly gave myself to someone, show them my pure emotion, that they would reciprocate it. And 99.9% of the time, they didn't. I was just a stepping stone to their next relationship. And it's unfortunate because we men, most of us, we want to love. We want to be in that committed relationship. We want that marriage like our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had, that you just stayed together. You celebrate your 50th or 60th anniversary.
Yeah.
And that's the dream that we cannot have anymore.
We're trained and reasonably so to feel that endurance is a quality, and also, I would say, if I was asked, what men want is just a reasonably safe place to put all the love in their hearts. And they have a lot of love in their hearts. And this safe place is not as, it's a lot rarer than we would have thought. And the worst part is we don't trust ourselves anymore. because it's our own judgment, that got us into the grief in the first place. I mean, obviously I have to take a certain amount of responsibility for everything that happens in my life. But I'd say that there's two great loves that every man has, and that's a fantastic one that he can't have, and a regular everyday one that he can have. That I think maybe that's the trick, of just being okay with okay.
Well, I would say that the two great loves a man can have is a love for himself and a love for others. Unfortunately,
sure.
society teaches us that we're not allowed to love ourselves, and we must put our love in everyone else. And in order to become emancipated as you have, we need to reject the notion that we have to love anyone else. We can choose to, but not have to. But we have to love ourselves. And that is a hard thing for men to do. And it sounds like you do love yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to love, and whether what we focus that on, it's just better to focus on something that's not going to snap at you or bite you or stab you in the back.
Well, so much for the pet shark. All right, so that's going to end it for us today. What are some ways that people might be able to reach out to you?
Well, I'm usually available on Facebook. That's probably the most reliable source at this point.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you for sharing these stories. I mean, I can't imagine it's very easy to share this, but I hope it serves as a good lesson for men out there, especially future generations of men.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you too, and also, eventually, what happens with the injuries that we receive in life is we get to share them and show them off, as long as we survive them.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a good night.
All right. Thank you so much.